Key, Lisa Kudrow, Jerry Seinfeld, and an A-list of celebrity friends.
Tonight at 9 on WTTW 11.
Hi Chicago, I'm Dante and you're watching WTTW Channel 11.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight on this Monday, November 19th.
I've always been there on the first day.
We want to be number one so we can get our name number one on the ballot.
Ready, set, go. Day one for candidates to formally turn in their petitions to run for mayor. And a look at the hot political, financial, and housing issues facing City Council.
This story is about a giant illegal dump, 6 stories high.
Hear from the creator of a new podcast about an old Chicago scandal that still reverberates today.
We've made enormous progress with discovering brand new things.
One of the world's most comprehensive studies of Alzheimer's disease is taking place in Chicago. And Hamilton is at the center of a new book that looks at the American stage of the past 25 years. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brandis Friedman. A deadly shooting at Chicago's Mercy Hospital. Amanda Vinicky has the latest on that breaking story. Amanda.
A suspected gunman and at least one victim are reportedly dead after a shooting this afternoon at Mercy Hospital on the south side of Chicago. 2 others, including a Chicago police officer, were last listed in critical condition. The police officer is receiving treatment at the University of Chicago Trauma Center. The incident is believed to have stemmed from a domestic dispute. A witness says he watched the confrontation from an emergency room window.
Guy out there, military style, shooting at the police, pow, 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 and he like he know what he was doing, right? So then we looked and we seen either a lady or a man laying down on the ground by the main entrance. He turned around and just shot her again or him again, pow, pow. Then he took off, ran up inside the main entrance. Then once he ran inside the main entrance, the Sarge ran through the emergency room with his gun out, told us to get on the floor, get on the floor. We heard shots, bang, 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 bang.
The shooting occurred around 3:30 this afternoon. The hospital was put on lockdown. By 4:40, Mercy Hospital gave word via Twitter that police had secured the hospital and patients are safe. Here's a recording of the police scanner.
Went into the hospital. He went into the hospital. And they got a female down in the parking lot. Once again, it's going to be an active shooter at this time. We got a person with a gun inside of Mercy Hospital. We got a female down on the parking lot, appears domestic related. Description they provided was a male Hispanic, named Juan Lopez, black jacket. Supposed to be male Hispanic, 32 years old. Boy, now they got shots fired inside the hospital. Shots fired inside the hospital.
But it's still coming. I'm on her zone 4.
They're still looking for more cars. They're still rolling more cars. Once again, there's going to be an active shooter inside of Mercy Hospital. We got shots fired inside the hospital. Female down in the parking lot.
Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel and Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson are monitoring events and are expected to hold a news briefing later this evening. We will have more on this story tomorrow night. As for the weather, we'll likely see snow overnight, but less than a ½ inch should stick, otherwise mostly cloudy with a low around 25. Then mostly sunny tomorrow with a high near 32. And don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also watch via podcast in the PBS video app. And now, Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And they're off. Candidates for Chicago mayor, aldermen, and other municipal posts made it official today. On the first day, they were able to file petitions with the Board of Elections. Who's in, who's out, and what is the significance of today's actions? Paris Schutz has the latest. Paris.
Brandis, they lined up outside the Board of Elections at 69 West Washington in the Loop early this morning. Candidates of all stripes from all walks of life vying to hold public office. There were hundreds of hopefuls that filed in aldermanic races and for other offices like city clerk and city treasurer. But of course, the main show is mayor of Chicago. And today, 5 of the declared candidates turned in their nominating petitions with the requisite 12,500 signatures from Chicago residents that it needs to get on the ballot. But most got triple, quadruple, or even more than that just to be on the safe side. And so the ones that filed today were Willie Wilson, who had staffers camp overnight to be first, Tony Preckwinkle, Paul Vallis, Jerry Joyce, and a candidate by the name of Catherine the Tycoon. And the only thing we could find out about her was she once ran for 21st alderman, but she was knocked off the ballot because she did not have valid signatures. So candidates have an entire week to do this, but today's early birds say there's a method to their madness.
Want to be #1 so we can get our name #1 on the ballot. You know, so we wanted to make sure that was in place. We wanted to make sure that we had all the things in place to be able to take care of, and try to just make sure that people see we're the only true candidate out here, real one.
Well, I think I first filed for office in the city of Chicago in 1983, and I've always been there on the first day. It's really important to be part of the lottery for first ballot position. It's also a show of strength.
We knew we had enough petitions. We really closely examined all of our petitions. We're very confident that we have well over 3 times the number that we need. And the important thing, though, is that we got signatures from all over the city.
In Paris, is there some sort of decided advantage to turning in your petitions early?
That is the question, Brandon. So every candidate that was in line by 9 a.m. this morning and filed, they will get put into a lottery to see who gets to be put first on the ballot, and then second and third. And then there's a second group, everyone that came thereafter, and then all the way through the petitions closing at on November 26th. So they've got a week to do this. So everyone from now until then will be put into a second group, and their lottery will be to determine where they are, whether they'll be last or somewhere in the middle of the ballot. So the chair of the Chicago Elections Board says different candidates have different opinions on what gives them the greater leg up.
There's some people that think that the higher you are on the ballot, the better your chances are. On the contrary, there's other people who think that if you're way at the bottom, maybe the last person on the ballot, you have a better chance. So I'd like to see a psychologist or analyze this phenomena.
And Paris, you said petitions close next week. Remind us the time frame. What happens next?
So November 26th, that's the last day that you can get your petitions in if you want to run for any municipal office in Chicago. And then the age-old tradition of trying to knock the candidates off the ballot. So we know there will be several candidates challenging each other's petitions. So what they're going to try and find is whether the names are fake, the addresses are fake, they're not registered voters, all the way to perhaps the binding on the petitions was done incorrectly. It could be a little technicality just like that. And there are election lawyers that make their living finding these things and doing these things. So they have until December 3rd to file their challenges to the other candidates, and then the Board of Commissioners has to hold sort of a court-like hearing to determine whether the objection is upheld or withdrawn. So it's a massive amount of work to do in a short period of time.
In this case, it's going to be the number of candidates we will have and the number of objections that will be filed. That's going to be the challenging part where the Board of Elections will have to decide on these challenges in time to have a printed ballot ready for the voters on February 26th.
February 26th is the main election, but there is early voting in this election, Brandis. That could start January 17th at the Loop Super Voting site. So all of this would have to be done by January 17th to make sure the ballot is 100% accurate.
Paris, thank you. And after the break, Carol Marine and her panel look at some of the pressing issues facing the City Council.
City Council overwhelmingly approved a 2019 budget with no major tax or fee increases, an election year tradition. But the next mayor and City Council face more than $2 billion in pension contributions, double what they are now, and a problem that is crying out for a solution, one among many. And just who will that next mayor be? Joining us with insights into the city problems and other issues, Alderman Ricardo Munoz of the 22nd Ward on the West Side, Heather Sharon, managing editor of the Daily Line, and Alderman Brian Hopkins, North Side's 2nd Ward. Welcome back, all of you, to Chicago tonight.
Thank
Heather,
you for having us.
Let's start with you. So, aldermen have this thing called a prerogative. What is that?
It essentially gives each alderman the final say over anything that's built within the confines of their wards. And the issue is that that means that an alderman can stop any sort of project he or she doesn't like, be that a development with lots of trucks or an affordable housing project. And that's where the rubber has met the road recently.
And that's where a lawsuit was just filed, correct?
That's correct. So a group of community, or a coalition of community groups has asked the federal government to basically find that practice in violation of fair housing laws and to order the city to stop following that rule, which is unwritten and has almost never been violated. There was an attempt several months ago.
You don't mean violate, you mean...
It's never violated. It would be considered a breach of the highest order of the decorum on the city council.
That other aldermen will respect the territory of the alderman's ward in question. Alderman Hopkins, is aldermanic privilege just a way to keep the city more segregated?
Well, it does seem to have that effect. The numbers do suggest that we have difficulty citing affordable housing. There's always a backlash. There's always a local resistance to that. Although as a city, we all seem to agree we need more of it. But when you come down to specific sites and you say, well, we're going to put the affordable housing here, a lot of times the neighbors organize against it. So if we're going to make this change and take this power away from us, I can tell you that as an alderman, zoning decisions are among the most controversial decisions that we make. So if that power is removed from us, on the one hand, our lives will get certainly less stressful than they currently are. But actually, this is a prerogative of the legislative branch of government, not just individual aldermen. So how you take this legislative power away and give it to the executive branch, I'm assuming, I'm really not sure how that happens.
Are you for or against removing aldermanic privilege?
Frankly, I don't think it can be done. I'd like to see how you take something that's cultural. As Heather said, it's an unwritten rule. It isn't something that exists anywhere on paper. How do you legislate that out of existence? I frankly don't think it's even possible.
Alderman Munoz, where do you fall on this?
You elect better aldermen. That's the bottom line. Because let me give you a history lesson. In the early 90s, when Scattered Site was a program that CHA was trying to implement in the city, many an alderman basically said no to the zoning. Some of us, including myself, said, I need Scattered Site housing. I need
more affordable housing,
some public housing. And we built some units in the ward, which my neighbors were against. I mean, neighbors are naturally NIMBYs.
Well, wait a minute. So rather than elect better aldermen, because that can be a crapshoot in Chicago, why not just remove aldermanic privilege?
As has been talked about, it's not a rule.
I know,
it's not
cultural.
a law.
But segregation is cultural also, isn't it? I mean, so Heather?
Well, there's no downside for an alderman to say no. So there was a proposal to build 30 units of affordable housing on the far northwest side. Alderman Anthony Napolitano was dead set against it. There was an effort by some aldermen to push that through. And even aldermen who favor affordable housing were reluctant to go against one of their colleagues and basically overrule his judgment for his area. So,
you, by the way, declined our invitation to come on this panel.
But it's been overruled before.
In very limited cases.
I mean, the Children's Museum.
Sure.
So, functionally, aldermen have veto power over what goes into their wards, correct?
Practically speaking, yes.
You have a controversy brewing in your ward regularly with this Lincoln Yards project right now, where residents packed a meeting recently and said, we want more park space, this is so dense, and are very concerned about TIFs. Where are you going with that?
Well, that's actually a good example in the context we're just talking about. My neighboring aldermen have expressed their opposition to this. So this is an example of how aldermanic prerogative is not necessarily a black and white issue. There's some flexibility in how we interact with our neighboring aldermen, here's a case where there's some disagreement in just this one local issue. But TIF is a controversial subject matter. I like to say TIF is actually a four-letter word in Chicago politics. None of us in the city council want to embrace this because there is so much controversy around it. This is not my proposal. It's the mayor's proposal. He's put it out there on the table, and my job is to see that it gets a thorough public vetting. We just had the first of what will be several public hearings where questions are being asked, and I vowed to not let this pass until all the questions are answered to my satisfaction.
Functionally, though, TIFs take money and sort of segregate it so that taxpayers end up having to pick up a larger share of other things, right?
We're subsidizing private development at the expense of public expenditures. Yes.
And so why do we keep doing that?
It's wrong. It's wrong. I have an ordinance in the city council that we call it the Back to Basics, which is taking TIFs back to where they were in the 1980s, which asks the question, but for this TIF, would this project happen?
Is that the ordinance that's sort of dead in the Rules Committee right now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Heather, where are we going with TIFs?
Well, this is a big question because it certainly exacerbated the budget crisis that we've seen at Chicago Public Schools over the last several years because the school district lost money to these sort of Lincoln Yards type development. And it's important to point out that this money isn't like going into the pocket of the developers. It's being used to create the roads and the bridges and the other infrastructure that these developments could not be built without.
And we're not going to charge the developer for those things, right? We're going to charge the taxpayer.
It works on a reimbursement basis. The developer would pay for something that's considered a public benefit, like a bridge or a road, or in my example is the extension of the 606 trail, which is something I've been advocating for throughout my entire term. The developer would pay for that and then submit a request for reimbursement. And if it does serve the public good, the reimbursement is granted.
When we talk about the public good in Chicago, we're kicking around this notion of a $10 billion bond issue because of the plight of our pension circumstance. The ratings agencies say to Mayor Emanuel's administration, it's a crazy bad idea. Is that crazy bad idea, according to the agencies anyway, going to fly, Heather?
Well, we'll know a little bit more on December 12th when Mayor Emanuel has promised to deliver a speech about his path for the pension crisis before the next city council meeting. Whether he will be able to sort of push that level of borrowing through before his term ends while pushing through several multi-billion-dollar TIFs, I think, is an open question.
Are you voting for the bond issue, Rick Munoz?
Got to see the details, got to see the plan.
Nobody's seen the details.
I know.
Nobody's got a plan that we can see.
I'm aware of that. That's why I'm cautioning on what we do. What we need to do, what the city needs to do, is figure out some progressive revenue options that don't tax Mr. Martinez or Ms. Cobblefield on Costner or on Lawndale.
So what are those? Short of a bond issue, what are those?
I'll throw one out.
Okay.
A municipal income tax. Let's think about that. Nobody's ever talked about that. But an income tax.
Which would generate how much?
Okay, an income tax on folks that make more than $150,000 a year at a 1.5% to 2% generates about $650, $700 million. That's on income, on everybody who works in the city, including suburbanites. So let's talk about that. Nobody's ever talked about it. I'm throwing it out there because we have to get creative. We have to get progressive of how we tax people. We can't tax property any higher.
Anymore.
And we can't ticket our way out of this debt.
So Alderman Hopkins, are you for the bond issue?
Well, again, I'm waiting to see the details too. I think it's
Do
interesting
we have an
that
explanation why we can't see details?
You know, I believe the mayor was very proud of this current budget that passed with only one dissenting vote, and he had a feeling that he was going to be able to get that budget through the city council on the fast track that he did, and he didn't want to take the chance that the whole thing could come unraveled by adding this very controversial pension obligation bond deal to the current budget. Even to have it debated at the same time would have created a lot of confusion and possibly could have jeopardized his entire budget deal.
Which is an election year budget.
Clearly.
Which nobody
Right.
wants to jeopardize. So
the budget was the good, bad, and the ugly. The good is we're operating. The bad is that we're not really fixing anything. The ugly is we're still not opening the mental health clinics.
So Heather, how many mayoral candidates do we now have in the city of Chicago by our latest count?
Well, the daily line goes by whether you filed paperwork with the State Board of Elections to raise money, and that is a grand total of 24 candidates.
2 dozen?
2 a dozen.
And do we have an expectation of how many are actually going to make it out of the petition challenges?
Significantly fewer than that. I think the going guess is that we will have somewhere in the neighborhood of less than 10 candidates on the ballot.
Is that good for this city, Alderman Hopkins?
Well, 10 candidates is still a very large field, and it's still a wide variety of viewpoints and perspectives. We're going to have a spirited debate on a number of issues. We talked about some of them here tonight: development, aldermanic prerogatives, zoning, pensions.
Do you
The more
have a
candidates
favorite
we have, the
mayoral
better.
candidate?
Actually, I have my top 2 choices for the runoff, the 2 seats available. I'd like to see Susana Mendoza and Bill Daley in those 2 seats.
Alderman Munoz, do you have any horses in this race?
I do not. I just know that I don't like folks that started their politics on the southwest side working for the HTO, which is the candidate Susana Mendoza, who has a really bad legislative record and basically hasn't had a real election.
Is she the only one you don't like?
There's a couple others, but you got Gary McCarthy, police superintendent, you got Paul Vallis, who charters everything.
So have you picked somebody that you do like?
Not yet.
And so, Heather, in terms of a meaningful Chicago debate, even if it's with 10 people, how does that happen?
It's difficult. I mean, it's difficult for the reporters, and it's difficult for the residents to sort of sort through all of the different proposals. Let's not forget that we've got, a 800-pound gorilla in the race, Bill Daley. His name carries a lot of cachet.
Well, he's got the most money so far, but we'll see how that goes. Alderman Munoz, Heather Sharon, Alderman Hopkins, thank you for joining us on Chicago Tonight. There's more ahead. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the City Club of Chicago.
Smart people may disagree about what makes a great city, but part of what makes Chicago great is that we don't have to agree. To run a city like ours, a lot of issues come up. The City Club of Chicago is a place to debate those issues and hear from the men and women who shape the policies, lead the industries, and tell the stories that define our city. For the free and open exchange of ideas, the City Club of Chicago.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a groundbreaking study of Alzheimer's disease searches brains for some long-sought answers. And from Hamilton to Angels in America, a new book about contemporary American theater from Chicago Tribune critic Chris Jones. But first, in 1996, Chicago was consumed by news of the corruption probe the FBI was calling Operation Silver Shovel. 18 individuals, including 6 aldermen, were convicted for accepting bribes or favors from an undercover informant in exchange for permitting illegal landfills, among other environmental misdeeds. The convictions signaled the end of the FBI's operation, but it wasn't the end of the story. In fact, it was barely even the beginning. The first season of the new podcast from USA Today called The City dives deeply into the events that led up to the scandal and the effects that continue to this day. Here's a clip from the introduction.
Anytime you see anybody drive over in a vacant lot in a limo, you know it's no good.
This story is about a giant illegal dump, 6 stories high.
It was huge mountains, concrete, garbage.
Built from the broken pieces of a city in the midst of a so-called renaissance.
I thought that downtown, City Hall, would do right by the people. I didn't think they'd care less about us.
And built not just by dump trucks and bulldozers and construction cranes, but also by corruption, apathy, and greed.
And joining us is the podcast creator, executive producer, and host, Robin Amer. Welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what is the outline of this story? We just heard a little bit about it, but what's the outline here?
So the story starts in the North Lawndale neighborhood in 1990
with residents of this majority black neighborhood watching a series of mysterious dump trucks arrive in their neighborhood one day. And these dump trucks start dumping load after load of construction debris across the street from an elementary school. And these residents don't know where the trucks are coming from. They don't know why they're there, but immediately they know this is really bad, as I think any of us would if mysterious trucks showed up across the street from our house one day and started dumping. And gradually they learn that a man named John Christopher has set up a pair of illegal landfills and is charging very prominent, well-connected construction companies a fee to dump illegally in this neighborhood. As the story unfolds, we learn more about who this man, John Christopher, is and what his backstory is, and that eventually leads to this undercover FBI investigation that you alluded to in the opening.
And it gets pretty juicy from there.
Right.
Those landfills, the dumps, they got to be pretty big.
Yeah, so the bigger of the two dumps was eventually nicknamed the Mountain because at its peak, it was more than 6 stories high, which is really astounding. I mean, we're talking about an older Chicago neighborhood where, you have 3 flats and gray stone houses. There are no structures taller than 3 stories there. So this illegal dump, which was full of concrete slabs and chunks of asphalt and rebar and bricks, just towered over everything else in the neighborhood and presented a real safety threat and environmental hazard to the people who lived there.
Where'd you get the idea for this story?
Well, I've been reporting on what I would describe as the built environment in Chicago for a long time, and that eventually led me to report on environmental justice issues in the city. And I was looking around for a story that could be worthy of a 10-episode series, and I came across this story about this illegal 6-story dump in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And when I first read that, I thought, I can't be reading this correctly. A 6-story dump in the middle of a residential neighborhood? How does that happen? And I became consumed with answering that question, right? How does this happen? What systems have to fail? What elected officials have to look the other way? What accountability measures have to be left by the wayside in order to result in this illegal dump? And then when I learned that not only was there a 6-story illegal dump, but there was this undercover investigation that had resulted in these secretly recorded tapes of aldermen allegedly accepting bribes, I was like, well, that's a story that I have to tell.
And it sounds like that took you to learning about the silver shovel scandal.
Correct.
Tell us about that.
Sure. So at the risk of giving out spoilers to anyone who hasn't yet heard the show, the man responsible for these illegal dumps, John Christopher, had a lengthy criminal background and was also connected to the Chicago mob. And he ran afoul of the FBI around the same time he was setting up these illegal dumps. And rather than just send him to prison, they convinced him to wear a wire. And because he told the FBI that he had been bribing elected officials his whole adult life, they put him at the center of this new undercover corruption probe called Silver Shovel. And so he started building on his network of political connections, approaching aldermen and other elected officials and saying, hey, I'll do something for you if you do something for me. He asked them for a variety of things. He asked for help setting up rock crushing operations or illegal landfills. He asked them for help obtaining city contracts under false pretenses with a sham minority-owned business. And in exchange, he offered them money. And some of them said no, but many said yes on tape. And with those tapes, the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office was able to send a lot of people to prison.
What were you hoping to achieve with telling a 20-year-old story?
Right. So a couple things. I mean, even though this story largely took place in the past, I would say that the issues at stake here are still incredibly relevant. I mean, we like to say that our show is a show about power, who has it, who doesn't, how people fight for it. And the issues at the center of the story are ones that I would describe as being about environmental justice. And we know that neighborhoods like North Lawndale, majority black neighborhoods, are still disproportionately affected by hazardous pollution, including the kind of illegal dumping that we saw here. And not only was this a problem in North Lawndale, but it's still a problem today in Chicago in places like the Southeast Side, where residents are fighting against piles of manganese, which is a neurotoxin. We saw this with pet coke on the Southeast Side too. And it's a problem in neighborhoods all over the country. So it's an older story, but one I think that resonates today.
Chicago Tonight viewers, of course, will recognize a familiar voice, someone we just heard from a few moments ago, our own Carol Marine. We like to think she's our own. Can you tell us about her contribution to this entire story, not just your podcast?
Sure. Well, I certainly don't want to speak for Carol, but she has been lovely to work with on this project. So Silver Shovel was an undercover investigation. It was secret for 3.5 years while the FBI was investigating these aldermen. And then a week before the investigation was supposed to go live, and they had been scheduled to, interrogate more than 40 targets on a single day, an intrepid investigative reporter breaks the story. And Carol, of course, was that reporter. And so in our show, we tell the story of how she broke that story and the chain of events that she set into motion, where the FBI had to scramble to do their takedown a week earlier than they had originally intended. And then the way that her story basically becomes a huge national news story.
And as Carol will tell us, you can as well. This kind of journalism, it's a lot of work. What kind of resources did it take for you?
Sure. So I've been working on this story for almost 3 years, and with the team that I eventually hired to help me do the reporting, we interviewed more than 65 people. We amassed more than 30,000 pages of documents, including federal court records, city records, EPA records, and we also sued the FBI earlier this year. I tried for 2 years to get tapes that were made as part of Silver Shovel through the FOIA process, Freedom of Information Act. The FBI declined to provide those tapes via FOIA, so we sued them and then eventually negotiated to get about 9 of these secret tapes, and people can hear many of those tapes in the show.
In one of the episodes, you ask, who's responsible for that dump? Were you able to, obviously John Christopher plays a central role, but were you ever able to answer that question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we joked on our team, and we say in the show that we started keeping what we call the blame list of both individuals and institutions who all played a role in creating these illegal dumps and letting them be there for nearly a decade. Certainly John Christopher, certainly a very clouded, well-connected, privately owned construction companies like Lindahl Brothers and K5, which were sued by the city, accused of being part of this illegal dumping. They later settled with the city. The politicians who took bribes and allowed this dumping to take place, including former Alderman Bill Henry, who died before he ever had his day in court, but John Christopher called him a $5,000 guy, right? He allegedly took $5,000 a month to look the other way and let these dumps exist. But then...
And what's on those dumps right now? Sorry.
Sure, no problem. The list goes on from there.
I'm sure it does. But what's the lot like now?
Sure. So the lot where the mountain, as we called it, existed is now a vacant 21-acre parcel of land at the corner of Roosevelt and Costner in North Lawndale. It has remained undeveloped in part because of some of the same structural inequities that allowed that dump to exist in the first place. There have been a number of proposed developments for that site, none of which have come to fruition. There's currently a plan on the table by a company called Clarius Partners to develop something like 300,000 square feet of light industrial space. But in part because that land used to be home to several factories, it's a brownfield, it's contaminated, and so it'll be very expensive to redevelop on that land.
And Robin Amer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And you can visit our website for a link to the podcast and to see a 1996 Chicago Tonight episode featuring Carol Maureen talking about breaking the Operation Silver Shovel story. An estimated 5 million Americans currently live with Alzheimer's disease, and within 30 years, that number is expected to more than triple. The memory-depleting condition has been the subject of research for many years, but there's only one long-range comprehensive study that has tracked thousands of participants who have all agreed to donate their brains to science. And that research is centered right here in Chicago. Eddie Aruza has more.
I'm going to show you those same 10 words one more time. Read them out loud. Try to remember them.
Once a year, Calvin Claus undergoes a battery of professionally administered brain teasers to see how his memory and cognitive skills are holding up.
Oh, I'll get the last one. Engine, grass, butter. Oh, golly. It drops right out.
At 93 years old, Calvin Claus may forget a few words here and there, but he remains remarkably sharp.
I'm in pretty good shape for the shape I'm in. Put it that way. I feel happy about myself, but I know I'm declining.
13 years ago, when the World War II veteran was only 80, he and his late wife Nona learned about a long-term research project conducted by the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, and they both signed up. Research assistants like Shayla Calloway visit participants and conduct memory and cognitive tests, as well as monitor mobility and run some routine physical tests. Participants must also agree to something else.
We have to will our brain to the research, And so after we pass away, they do a histological study of the brain tissue.
The recipient of those brains is Dr. David Bennett, the head of the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. Dr. Bennett began analyzing Alzheimer's infected brains as a young researcher 30 years ago, but he quickly discovered the methodology was lacking.
To learn about the disease, you need to compare people that have it to people that don't. And we would get patients with end-stage Alzheimer's disease and get their brains, and there was nobody to compare them to.
That led Dr. Bennett to start looking for potential risk factors that might lead to Alzheimer's dementia. He proposed a project that would track people without dementia starting around age 65 until the end of their lives. But Dr. Bennett wanted to ensure that he could keep track of his test subjects over what could be many years, and he came up with the idea of recruiting volunteers from religious orders.
We thought they would agree to the organ donation. We didn't have to worry about spouses or children interfering with the autopsy, so we knew that the orders would work hard to carry out the wishes of their participants.
In the early 90s, the first volunteers were sisters from the Congregation of St. Joseph in west suburban LaGrange Park. But the study has since expanded to other religious orders across the country, as well as continuous care retirement centers like Luther Village in Arlington Heights, where Calvin Claus lives. Over the years, more than 3,500 participants, some now deceased, have enrolled. Among those who donated their brains was Calvin's wife, Nona, who died 3 years ago at the age of 86.
She was a professional musician. She played clarinet. Dr. Bennett indicated that there were some early signs of Alzheimer's. I think music has a way of kind of overriding the outward symptoms of Alzheimer's.
Over the last 26 years, Dr. Bennett and his research staff have conducted more than 1,500 autopsies on donated brains. What he's found is that Alzheimer's dementia is a complicated set of diseases, more so than was previously thought. But some of Dr. Bennett's research has had to wait until the technology caught up.
In the next room, there's 60 freezers, with brain tissue that we've been saving since 1994. And it wasn't until 2008 to 10 that the kinds of molecular genomics that we're doing now was even possible. So for the first 15 years, the brains sat there.
Dr. Bennett's decades-long investigation has produced a number of discoveries for which he received this year's Potamkin Prize from the American Academy of Neurology. It's often called the Nobel Prize for research into Alzheimer's and related diseases. And Dr. Bennett might be on the cusp of even more discoveries related to biospecimens he's been collecting.
We are, I would say, within a number of months of being able to determine whether some of these genes and proteins are targetable. We've made enormous progress with discovering brand new things and taking new paradigms and new looks at how we think about attacking this illness.
But Dr. Bennett cautions that there are many years, if not decades, of research ahead. In the meantime, he recommends
you have to be happy, chillax, and don't be so neurotic. You have to be conscientious. You have to have a purpose in life, something that makes your life intentional and goal-directed.
Calvin Claus has his own professional insights into what makes for a healthy brain. That's because for 30 years he taught college-level psychology, and he says the students kept him young. He also gives credit to learning the piano, singing, and maintaining a sense of humor.
I had a little drink about an hour ago, and it went right to my head.
And here's to Calvin Claus and his healthy brain as he approaches 94. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Eddie Aruza.
The Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center is still looking for new study participants. If you'd like to take part in it, in the Alzheimer's dementia study, you need to be 65 or older. We have more information on our website, as well as a short video about Rush's so-called Mind Diet.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
The musical Hamilton is now in its third year in Chicago. Its blend of hip-hop and history is also a big hit in theaters across America. A new book looks at the trajectory in American theater that led to Hamilton. Looking back over the past 25 years, Rise Up, Broadway and American Society, from Angels in America to Hamilton. is the new book by Chicago Tribune theater critic Chris Jones, who joins us now. Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So how did this book come about? Did you look back over the last 25 years and realize there were significant developments?
I think I got the idea watching the Tony Awards in 2016, and Lin-Manuel Miranda, who of course created Hamilton, was introduced by President Obama and the First Lady at the Tony Awards in like a little video. And I remember thinking, that has got to be the first time a sitting president has ever introduced a nominee for an Oscar, an Emmy, a Golden Globe, or a Tony. Never happened before. So I thought, how did this show get at the center of American political discourse?
And we're going to come back to that. But you also write, backing up to 1993, that when Angels in America opened in Broadway in '93, that American theater would never be the same. What was it that changed?
Well, I think the beginning of this road to Hamilton, if you like, was Angels in America, which was the idea that theater could be at the center of sort of politics. This was a play that came out at the height of the AIDS crisis, when people were going to funerals, and that it was very difficult to sort of reconcile political change with just sort of weariness that people felt over so many young people dying. And Tony Kushner wrote this play that broke a lot of rules. It was 6 hours long. It was, an epic affair, and it was a huge success. And it was like one of the first shows that really showed Broadway that if you really have ambition and you really sort of talk about things that people really care about, then success can follow. So it was the moment when theater learned not to be trivial, if you know what I mean.
Soon after the election, 2 years ago, back in 2016, Vice President-elect at the time, Mike Pence, he went to see Hamilton on Broadway, and he was addressed by a cast member after the show. There's a bit of video of it right here. President Trump, president-elect at the time, he demanded an apology because he said the theater is, quote, a safe and special place. Is it? Should it be?
Well, no. It's supposed to be anything but a safe and special place. It's supposed to be a dangerous place. It's supposed to be a place where ideas, where change happens, where people come to realizations, and that's what Hamilton was. And I think, President Trump was wrong about that. Now, what's fascinating to me is that now we sit here, as we sit here tonight, there's been all these Trump tweets that have caused controversies. This was the very first one. He wasn't even president at that point. So the very first sort of controversial Trump tweet, if you like, took place at Hamilton. It was the day after, and he sort of said, shame on you, apologize to a good man. That was an interesting event because you can argue that Vice President Pence was entitled to a night out with his family, or you can argue that those performers were entitled to say their piece. But either way, Trump didn't like it. And then we had the same incident in Chicago about a week or two later, where a Trump supporter got up at Hamilton and shouted out, we won, in the theater, interrupting the show. So that was all an indicator of just how much this show was sort of roiling America.
You write that Hamilton was practically workshopped at the White House in front of then President Obama. Remind us how that happened.
Well, it was like Lin-Manuel was doing a sort of piece at the White House where he was creating something called Hamilton the Mixtape. And I think the Obamas were interested because, of course, Hamilton was the first Secretary of the Treasury. And so this was a chance to sort of get involved, get kids involved in American history, talk about the Founding Fathers. It had a diverse young cast, so it sort of fit the Obama administration. And I think now, as we look back on the Obama administration, as their new library rises here in Chicago, this show is really central to what they stood for. And I think even now you can begin to see, just how important it was and how much it reflected what the Obama priorities were.
And then you also write about the so-called meta-musicals, which reference the fact that we are indeed in a musical. Is this a new development in theater, or has it just become fashionable?
Well, I think a lot of that had its origins right here in Chicago, where you began to see shows that knew they were shows, where people in it seemed to know they were in a musical. And I think that was indicative of just sort of shifting trends. Often when you get that in a show, it indicates that the world is a little insecure.
And this is Urinetown that we're taking a look at now, sorry.
That was a classic example of that form, and how the great tectonic plates are moving and reshifting. And I think it's so exciting that the theater finally figured out how to be at the center of all of that.
And then, of course, there's the overreach of shows. You mentioned the ambition. Some of them maybe get too ambitious, like Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. Do you think Broadway producers, do they learn from these costly experiences?
No, often they don't. So sometimes you're there at like a $30 million musical and you go, even the most fundamental things are not in place. Usually it's something's not true, or there's no meaningful relationship at the core of the show. So no. But, you know, on the other hand, if hits were easy, we'd all have them, and we'd all be making a ton of money. And they're not easy, and they're very, very hard to replicate. But the one thing that I feel like I've come to know, or to believe at least, is that if you have enough ambition, and if your shows are serious and have substantial things to say, people will respond to them. It's wrong to think that triviality is what makes success.
Chicago, it continues to play a huge role, obviously, in American theater, from incubating talent to trying out Broadway shows here. Talk about the city's continuing influence.
Well, I mean, we've just had more important Chicago tryouts. I mean, just this year, we've had Tootsie, we've had the Cher show, which opens on Broadway next week, 2 weeks away, I think. And so we are kind of the primary tryout town for everything that happens in New York. I think Broadway producers see Chicago audiences as the right combination of slightly supportive but also knowledgeable. So they see a replication of New York audiences with people are a little bit nicer. And so that, I think, is what brings those shows here. And, you know, I find that people in Chicago who like the theater really enjoy, people like to be on the ground floor of things here. We don't like to get stuff after New York. You know, we're Chicago. We need to get it first.
We're not the second city.
Right, exactly.
Well, and speaking of, do you think New York and the rest of the world are beginning to acknowledge Chicago's contribution that way?
Well, you know, Rahm Emanuel has declared 2019 the year of Chicago theater. It's his last, you know, not his last thing, but it's one of his last big things to do. And so I think that we're going to see more more promotion of the theater next year than we've ever seen in this city, more tourism, sort of related promotion. So I think 2019 is going to be a good year. It's like finally the city is getting behind one of its greatest assets.
We're almost out of time, but do you think there are any very recent shows that could have an impact on American culture?
Like Hamilton, you mean?
Like Hamilton.
I think it's very difficult to replicate Hamilton. I don't think we'll ever have a show, or at least not for a long time, that has anything like that. It was just a unique set of circumstances that can't easily be replicated. But, you know, maybe I'm wrong. You never know where it's going to hit. If it was easy, we'd all know how to do it.
A once-in-a-generation kind of performance. Okay. Chris Jones, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Again, the book is called Rise Up, Broadway and American Society, From Angels in America to Hamilton. And that's our show for this Monday night, abbreviated to bring you WTTW's live annual Great Treasure Hunt Sweepstakes drawing with Jeffrey Bear. So don't go away, that is coming up next. And don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing and join us tomorrow night live at 7. Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me host Peter Sagal on life lessons learned while running. And to look at the first electric guitar Bob Dylan ever performed with live. It's here at a local museum for a limited time. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices. Bob Clifford is on the board of overseers of the Rand Institute for Civil Justice, a think tank in California. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Howard and Ursula Dubin Foundation. Watch Chicago Tonight whenever you want and wherever you are. Online at WTTW.com/news, on our app, on Facebook Live, or subscribe to our podcast.
It's the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, honoring Julia Louis-Dreyfus with Stephen Colbert. Bryan Cranston, Tina Fey, Tony Hale, Keegan-Michael Key, Lisa Kudrow, Jerry Seinfeld, and an A-list of celebrity friends.
Tonight at 9 on WTTW 11.
On We'll Meet Again.
What went through you?
I considered him a brother. He was the only person that went through what I had.
A search to reunite people after the Holocaust.
Haven't seen her in all this time. This is my first friend in America. I would love to meet her.
Tuesday at 8 on WTTW 11.
Next time.
This is just the beginning.
The white power movement goes underground.
What do you think was going on in this house?
They were making bombs.
There was a nuclear plant off the coast of Florida, and they were planning on firing a mortar of nuclear materials at that plant.
Frontline and ProPublica investigate.
They are actively recruiting military members. Does that surprise you?
I'm telling you stuff that the FBI should be hearing.
Tuesday at 9 on WTTW 11.
Welcome to a very special holiday episode of America's Test Kitchen. The cast is sharing their secrets to holiday planning, holiday memories, and their all-time favorite recipes on this America's Test Kitchen special, Home for the Holidays.
Wednesday at 7 on WTTW 11.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Baer, live in the WTTW studios for a very exciting event. We're getting ready to draw winners in our 2018 Great Treasure Hunt Sweepstakes. We know that a lot of you tune in for this annual drawing to see if you're a winner, and we love it because this Thanksgiving week event gives us a chance to thank you for your support throughout the year. We're awarding some great prizes this evening, so let's get started. First, we'd like to tell you about some lucky winners whose names have already been drawn. The winners of our Spring Early Bird Prize are Joseph and Elizabeth DeJohn from Munster, Indiana. Joseph and Elizabeth will set sail through Old World Europe on an unforgettable cruise down the Rhine River with AMA Waterways. They'll savor gourmet dining and sleep in a luxurious stateroom while exploring charming villages and stunning countryside vistas. Enjoy your European excursion, Joseph and Elizabeth, with travel provided by our friends at American Airlines. Next, the winner of our Fall Early Bird Prize is James Back from Sandwich, Illinois, home of the Sandwich Fair. James will zip around Sandwich in this snazzy Wolf Islander scooter from City Scooters. This cheery retro scooter is ready for you, James, with no fuss parking and excellent gas mileage. And now it's time for the winner of this year's bonus prize. Congratulations, David Greenstein from Wilmette, Illinois. You are going to receive a beautiful carpet or a rug from our friends at Oscar Isbarian Rugs. For nearly 100 years, members of this family business have traveled the world searching for the finest artisan-crafted rugs, and they've been with us from the very beginning. We deeply appreciate that. All right, now, live, and with the help of this gentleman right here, Cameron Earnshaw from Plant Moran. He's going to oversee our drawing tonight, and with the help from my colleagues at WTTW, Carmelita Harris, Tom Peth, and Steve Monfils, we're going to draw for some of the biggest prizes in this year's sweepstakes. All right, let's get that drum rolling. The first winner in our live drawing will have a whale of a time at Shedd Aquarium. 2 winners will receive a guided behind-the-scenes tour of Shedd Aquarium and get up close and personal with a beluga whale. Here we go, Carmelita. Thank you very much. The lucky winner is Annette Butler from South Holland, Illinois. You're going to the Shedd Aquarium. Congratulations. All right, now, a prize that will sparkle for a lifetime from private jeweler Greg Helfer Limited. You'll light up the room with this stunning, brilliant cut diamond necklace and earring set. Here we go, drawing the next winner. Let's see who's going to win the beautiful diamond set. Thank you very much. All right, congratulations to Oscar Almonacci of North Aurora, Illinois. You won it. Congratulations. The next prize is a celebration with good food and friends. You and 14 of your closest friends will gather at the Wooden Spoon to enjoy entertainment from PH Comedy Theater, and then take to the kitchen with the Wooden Spoon head chef for a hands-on gourmet cooking and dining experience. Carmelita has the winner in hand. Let's see who it is. Thank you very much. All right. The winner is the winners are Mr. and Mrs. David Swanson of Schaumburg, Illinois. Congratulations. Okay, our next winner will rest easy on a handcrafted mattress set from our friends at Apt Electronics and Heirloom Mattresses. This luxurious bedding set is handcrafted with the highest quality materials to deliver restful nights. Let's find out who the winner of this top-of-the-line mattress set is. Reaching in the drum right now. There's our winner. Okay, Carmelita, let's see who it is. And the winner of the mattress set, Bonita Billa from River Grove, Illinois. Congratulations. All right, next, a prize for the Julia child in all of us. Become a kitchen master with expert-level cooking classes. Then pick out your favorite tools and ingredients, all courtesy of the chopping block. Got that drum in position. We're opening the door right now. We're going to find out who wins the cooking class and who gets the kitchen utensils. Here we go. All right, the winner is Ralph Kalman from Bloomingdale, Illinois. Congratulations. All right, finally, our grand prize. Here we go, the all-new 29 Subaru Outback Premium, courtesy of Subaru of America and the Chicagoland Subaru dealers. For those who savor the journey, the 2019 Subaru Outback is adventure-ready with premium safety features, innovative technologies, and luxury design. Now, before we award the spectacular grand prize, I'd like to introduce Rick Simnor from Subaru. Rick, welcome back.
Thank you, Jeffrey. On behalf of Subaru, we're proud to partner with WTTW for the 16th year in a row to help give away this new Outback here tonight.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's great to have you here again. All right, here we go. Let's spin the drum. We're about to give away a car, a Subaru Outback. Let's find out who's the winner of our grand prize. I can feel the tension mounting. Carmelita takes a deep dive in there. Here we go. All right, the winner of the Subaru, Ms. Jean Slater of Chicago, Illinois. You just won a brand new Subaru Outback. Thanks again, Rick, and thanks to Subaru. We truly appreciate your generous support for so many years of